The diner's door slammed shut as Abigail entered, pushed by the icy wind, trailing her from the streets of New York. The noise caused a few heads to turn, more out of annoyance than genuine interest. She kept her gaze lowered, her steps slow and unsteady, leaning on the doorframe to keep her balance. At 89 years old, age weighed heavily on her frail body, but what gnawed at her even more in that moment was the hunger burning in her empty stomach and the cold that seemed to pierce through her bones. I just wanted a coffee," she murmured, approaching the counter with a trembling voice, almost drowned out by the hum of voices and clinking silverware. Margaret, the owner of the diner, looked up from the notepad she was scribbling on and immediately frowned at the sight of Abigail. Dressed in a worn-out coat patched in several places and a torn scarf that barely covered her neck, Abigail was not exactly the type of customer Margaret wanted in her establishment. She slammed the notepad on the counter and crossed her arms, making a point of showing her disapproval. "This is not a shelter," she said sharply, loud enough for the nearby customers to hear. "If you're not going to order anything real, you can turn around and leave." Abigail swallowed hard, trying not to show the pain those words caused. Her wrinkled fingers, red from the cold, gripped the small cloth bag she carried close to her body. From inside, she pulled out a few loose coins and placed them on the counter with trembling hands. "This is all I have," she whispered. "Please, just a coffee." Soft chuckles from a few customers filled the air. A couple exchanged glances and shook their heads in disapproval, as if Abigail's presence were an offense to the space. Others looked away, uncomfortable, but preferred to pretend nothing was happening. That's when Joanne, the young waitress in a worn-out apron and tired eyes, approached the counter with a tray still in her hand. She'd heard the exchange and, without thinking twice, placed the tray on the nearest table and stared at Margaret. "She asked for a coffee, Margaret," she said firmly, her voice filled with indignation. "And she brought money. It's not right to treat a lady like that." Margaret shot her a scathing look. "Stay out of this, Joanne. You're not in charge here. I'm not going to tarnish my business by handing out charity." "It's not charity if she's paying," Joanne retorted, stepping closer to Abigail and resting a hand on her hunched shoulder. "Besides, it could be any one of us, couldn't it? That cold out there is killing people. She just asked for a coffee." The silence that followed was heavy. Margaret was about to explode, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "You know very well that's not the kind of customer I want in here. I won't let my diner turn into a shelter for the homeless." Abigail tried to step back, embarrassed, mumbling almost to herself. "I can leave. I didn't mean to cause trouble." But Joanne stepped forward and, in a quick motion, picked up the coins from the counter and returned them to Abigail's hands. "Keep this," she said gently, looking directly into the elderly woman's tired eyes. "Today's coffee is on me." Abigail looked at her, surprised, unsure whether to accept. Tears already welled up in the corners of her eyes and she could barely get the words out. "Thank you. Thank you, my dear," Margaret huffed, turning her back, but couldn't resist throwing out another threat. "If you keep this up, Joanne, you can find yourself another place to work." The waitress took a deep breath, still with her hand on Abigail's shoulder. She felt the weight of the warning but didn't back down. "If I have to lose my job for doing the right thing, so be it." A murmur spread among the customers, some showing approval, others pure discomfort. While all this was happening, Daniel, seated at a table in the far corner of the diner, watched the scene closely. His dark suit contrasted with the simple diner setting, and his presence there felt almost out of place. The coffee cup in front of him remained untouched. His observant eyes followed every word, every gesture, the humiliation imposed by Margaret, the sudden courage of Joanne, and Abigail's vulnerability. He said nothing. He simply let the scene unfold, absorbing every detail. The cold air still leaked through the poorly closed door, making the window panes tremble. And on that winter night, the only warmth seemed to be found in the courage of a young waitress and the fragile hope of an old woman forgotten by the world. Joanne guided Abigail to a nearby table, helping her sit. The smell of fresh coffee soon filled the air as the waitress placed the drink in front of her, along with a piece of bread she had grabbed from the kitchen on her own. "Here you go," Joanne said, smiling tenderly. "Drink slowly, it'll help warm you up." Abigail brought the trembling cup to her lips, closing her eyes as the warmth spread through her body. For the first time in many days, she felt like she wasn't alone. Across the room, Daniel continued to watch silently, his eyes fixed on the scene. Something inside him had begun to stir, though he wasn't yet sure what it was. "Here, take this bread too," said Joanne, placing the plate in front of Abigail with a gentle gesture. The elderly woman looked up, eyes brimming with tears, surprised by the kindness. Her trembling hand reached toward the plate, hesitant, as if unsure whether she was truly allowed to eat there. Steam still rose from the coffee cup, mixing with the smell of fried food and grease that clung to the diner's air. An uncomfortable silence hung in the air, broken only by the clinking of silverware at the more distant tables. Margaret, standing behind the counter, kept her arms crossed and her cold gaze fixed on the scene. Her clenched jaw betrayed her growing irritation. When she realized Joanne had not only served the coffee, but had also taken food from the kitchen without asking, her voice sliced through the room like a blade. "Have you lost your mind, Joanne?" she snapped. "Who told you to bring her bread? You trying to turn this place into a charity?" The waitress took a deep breath, but didn't back down. She remained upright beside Abigail, like a sentinel. "I did, Margaret. She needs to eat. And that piece of bread isn't going to bankrupt your business." Some customers, who had previously been silent onlookers, began whispering among themselves. There were disapproving glances cast at the owner, but also judgmental ones directed at Abigail, who tried to shrink into her chair, afraid of causing more trouble. "You never learn, do you?" Margaret shot back, stepping forward toward the table where the elderly woman sat. "This place is not a homeless shelter. If you keep going over my head, Joanne, consider yourself fired." Joanne swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the threat but didn't flinch. Her hand rested once again on Abigail's hunched shoulder, now trembling more from nerves than cold. "If you're going to fire me over this, that's fine. I'd rather lose my job than lose my dignity." The murmuring among the customers grew louder, some shaking their heads at Margaret, others just wishing the scene would end. Abigail clutched the locket hidden beneath her worn coat, as if clinging to it like a talisman against the hostility surrounding her. In the far corner of the diner, Daniel, who had remained motionless until then, lifted his head slightly, watching every detail. His eyes, hidden beneath the ceiling light's reflection, moved from Margaret's hardened face to Joanne's protective stance and Abigail's worn expression. The CEO looked out of place in the humble setting. Tailored suit, expensive watch, the air of someone used to automatic respect. And yet, he was there, silent, absorbing every nuance of the scene unfolding before him. Joanne, still standing firm, pulled a chair closer to the table and crouched in front of Abigail, speaking in a soft tone, ignoring Margaret's furious glare. "Don't worry, Mum. It's all right now. Drink your coffee slowly. It'll help warm you up." Abigail looked at her with restrained tears, mumbling a barely audible thank you. "You didn't have to. You're going to get in trouble because of me." "I don't care about that," Joanne replied at once, gently squeezing the elderly woman's wrinkled hand. "We all deserve a little respect." Margaret huffed and returned to the counter, but still threw out one final jab. "You're going to regret this, Joanne. Don't say I didn't warn you." The waitress didn't respond. She straightened up and headed to the kitchen to get more hot water, ignoring the hostile stares she felt on her back. As she walked, she thought of her mother, how she always told her never to turn away from injustice. Remembering that gave her strength, even as she quietly feared the consequences of her actions. Abigail, now alone at the table, lifted the cup again with trembling hands. The coffee was simple, cheap, but to her it tasted like a momentary rescue of humanity. Each sip warmed not only her body, but also the memory of times when she still had a home, a daughter, and a possible future. In the back of the diner, Daniel remained still, but now his gaze was locked on Abigail more intently. Something about her felt familiar, though he couldn't yet place it. Joanne's gesture, brave and unexpected, also touched him in a way he wasn't used to allowing. Accustomed to viewing the world through contracts and skyscraper glass, he saw before him a kind of courage that couldn't be bought. Conversations in the diner tried to return to normal, but the atmosphere remained heavy. The tension lingered in the air, even as silverware clinked once again against plates. Yet for three people, the hungry old woman, the rebellious waitress, and the silent man in the back, nothing was the same anymore. Abigail took a deep breath, still uncomfortable with the stares. Joanne returned with the pot of hot water and refilled the cup, smiling as if the gesture were the most natural thing in the world. "There you go. Now you can take your time. I'll make sure no one bothers you." The elderly woman nodded slowly, feeling for the first time that night that she wasn't entirely alone. Meanwhile, Margaret fumed behind the counter, and Daniel, in silence, took in every detail, preparing to act at just the right moment. The cup slipped slightly from Abigail's hands and clinked against the saucer, producing a sharp sound that echoed through the uncomfortable silence of the diner. The noise caused a few customers to turn their heads, but they quickly went back to their meals, as if unwilling to get involved. Without realizing it, Abigail had let her worn coat slip off her shoulders a bit, and at that moment, something shimmered under the warm ceiling light. Daniel, still seated in the back, widened his eyes. A thin, worn chain hung from the elderly woman's neck, revealing an old, time-worn locket. He straightened in his chair, unable to look away. His chest tightened, as if he were seeing something impossible, a ghost materialized in a simple detail. Abigail instinctively reached for the necklace, trying to tuck it back under her coat. But the gesture only drew more of Daniel's attention. He rose slowly, as if each step required thought, though his eyes remained fixed on the pendant that swung gently against the woman's chest. "That necklace," he murmured as he approached the table, his voice faltering for the first time in years. Abigail looked up, confused. Deep wrinkles framed her tired eyes, but within them still burned a spark of caution, as if she were always expecting to be hurt. "What did you say, sir?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel took a deep breath, pointing subtly at the locket. "That necklace. Where did you get it?" She lowered her gaze to the object, now glinting under the overhead light. Her trembling fingers brushed the metal surface, dulled with age but still holding a delicate clasp. "It's all I have left," Abigail replied, a mix of pride and sorrow in her voice. "It belonged to my daughter." Hearing those words, Daniel felt the ground slip out from under him. His breath quickened, and he had to steady himself on the back of a chair to keep from losing his balance. His heart pounded erratically, and a flood of memories began to overwhelm him. "Your daughter?" he pressed, his voice thick. "Was her name Lucy?" Abigail's eyes widened instantly at the question. Tears formed quickly, as though hearing that name aloud had reopened a wound she had long tried to bury. "Yes, Lucy," she whispered, stroking the pendant as if caressing her daughter's face. "My only daughter. My baby girl." Daniel stepped back, but he couldn't tear himself away. His throat tightened, and it took effort to form words. "I knew Lucy." Abigail blinked, trying to process what she was hearing. Joanne, watching from behind the counter, approached slowly, her face filled with concern and curiosity at the sound of Daniel's voice. You knew my Lucy?" the elderly woman asked, her voice trembling. Daniel took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and let the memory take over. He saw himself, still a teenager, running through a sunlit park, laughing alongside a girl with flowing hair and a bright, vibrant gaze. Lucy. She wore that same necklace over her heart and had once told him she'd never take it off. "She was the love of my life," he finally said, his voice breaking. "The first and only." The silence that followed felt heavier than the winter outside. Abigail brought her hands to her mouth, muffling a sob. Tears now streamed freely down her time-worn face. "So, that's why," she murmured, almost to herself. "That's why I feel like God brought me here today." Joanne stepped beside Abigail, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, trying to comfort her, though still unsure of the full weight of what was unfolding. Daniel, meanwhile, knelt in front of the woman, forgetting the room, forgetting the people around them. "I never thought I'd see anything that reminded me of her again," he confessed, his voice tight. "I never knew what happened to you, Abigail. I never knew where you went." The old woman looked down at him, her eyes filled with emotion, finally recognizing who was in front of her. The boy who had grown up in her home, the child she'd rocked in her arms when his parents were away. The boy who had become a man before her very eyes, until life pulled them apart. "Daniel," she said, her voice weak but rich with emotion. "You were like a son to me." Daniel closed his eyes and let a single tear roll down his cheek. The memory of Lucy burned in his mind, but now it blended with the image of Abigail, alive, though weathered by life. "And you were my second mother," he replied, gently holding her hands. "I never forgot you." The diner, once buzzing with whispers and muffled laughter, now sat in stunned silence. Some customers watched with curiosity, others looked away, not wanting to intrude on something so personal. Joanne, still stunned, squeezed Abigail's shoulder, realizing that she was now part of something far bigger than the simple act of paying for a coffee. Abigail opened the locket with difficulty. Inside, in a yellowed and faded photograph, was Lucy, smiling, young, full of life. Daniel touched the picture with his fingertips, as if trying to reach through time and bring her back. "She gave me this necklace," Abigail said through her tears. "She asked me to always wear it, so I'd never forget her." Daniel couldn't hold back anymore. He gripped Abigail's hand tightly and bowed his head, as if silently asking for forgiveness for all the years that had passed without searching for her. Joanne, moved, let a silent tear fall, realizing in that moment that she wasn't just witnessing a story of poverty and abandonment, but a bond that had survived time, cold, and even death. Nothing in that diner, not Margaret's hostility, not the wary glances from the other patrons, could erase the power of what had just been revealed. Abigail, Daniel, and Joanne were now bound by an invisible thread, woven from the pain of loss and the memory of a love that still lived in their hearts. "I shouldn't be here," Abigail murmured, lowering her eyes to the nearly empty cup in front of her. Daniel immediately looked up, his eyes still red and glistening with the tears brought on by the revelation. There was a knot in his throat, but the urgency to hear more from her pushed him to press on. "What do you mean, Abigail?" he asked gently, still holding her fragile hand. "You should be with me. You should have always been with us. What happened after?" Abigail took a deep breath, her chest rising as if even breathing had become painful. She ran her wrinkled fingers over the locket's chain, closing the pendant carefully before letting her hand fall onto the table. "After Lucy, after I lost her, everything fell apart." Her voice faltered, but returned, firm in a way that seemed to demand all her remaining strength. She was my only reason to live, my daughter, my little girl, and when she was gone, I lost myself too. Joanne came closer, pulling up a chair and sitting beside the elderly woman. Her face showed pure empathy but also curiosity. She wanted to understand how this woman, who seemed to carry the weight of a century's worth of pain, had ended up here. "Lost yourself how?" she asked softly, almost a whisper, as if she didn't want to intrude on Abigail's grief. The elderly woman closed her eyes, letting a tear slip down her cheek. "Alcohol, sweetheart. That's how it started." Abigail gave a small, bitter smile, tinged with shame. "First a glass to help me sleep, then another to help me forget, and before I knew it, I had no control left. Every sip pulled me deeper. I couldn't face her absence while sober, so I drank and drank until I lost everything." Daniel ran a hand through his hair in a nervous gesture, his heart pounding with every word. "You shouldn't have been alone, Abigail. Where were the people who could have helped you?" "They walked away," she answered, resigned. "Who wants to stay beside a broken woman who can't get out of bed without a drink? I dishonored my daughter's memory, and deep down, I believed I deserved the punishment of ending up alone." Joanne squeezed Abigail's arm, shaking her head in disagreement. "No one deserves to live without support. No one." The elderly woman sighed, looking at the young waitress with tenderness. "You're a kind soul, dear. Your mother must have been a strong woman to raise someone like you." The comment hit Joanne hard. She blinked quickly, trying to hold back the sudden wave of emotion. "I lost my mother too early," she admitted, her voice low. "Maybe that's why I didn't think twice about standing up for you when Margaret tried to throw you out. When I looked at you, I saw her face. I felt like I had to do something." Abigail stroked Joanne's hand, touched by the confession. Daniel, who had been listening quietly, closed his eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the connection forming between the two women. "And you, Daniel?" Abigail turned her gaze toward him, steady, as if trying to pierce through the years that had passed. "Why didn't you ever come back after my Lucy died?" He swallowed hard, his eyes drifting to the window, fogged up by the cold outside. Memories came rushing in, sunny days with Lucy, teenage promises that were never fulfilled, the abrupt accident that ended it all. "I couldn't," he finally said, his voice rough. "I loved her so much that when she was gone, I lost myself too. I couldn't love anyone else. I couldn't move on. But I should have found you. I should have been there for you." Abigail shook her head slowly. "No, my son. You were just a boy. It wasn't your burden to carry my grief." "But I still carry it," Daniel replied, clenching his fists on the table. "Since Lucy died, I've never been with anyone. I buried myself in work, trying to fill the void. But nothing ever erased the emptiness she left." The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Joanne looked away, giving them space to share in their grief. She could see clearly now that she was sitting across from two survivors, a man and a woman, both devastated by the same loss, but who had coped with it in very different ways. Abigail looked at Daniel with compassion. "You're still young, Daniel. Don't let Lucy's death take your life too." "I never could look at another woman without feeling like I was betraying her memory," he confessed. "Like loving again would erase what we had." "Loving again doesn't erase anything," Abigail replied firmly. "On the contrary, it proves that her life still lives within you, that the love you shared was so strong it gave you the capacity to feel again." Daniel looked at her in silence, his heart heavy with her words. Joanne, listening nearby, felt her own emotions welling up. There was something in Daniel's confession that echoed her own loneliness, her own silent losses. She took a deep breath and gently touched Daniel's hand in a spontaneous gesture. "Your pain is real, I understand that. But Maybe it's time to believe that you can still live something new." Daniel looked at the waitress, surprised by the honesty in her eyes. In that moment, he realized that Abigail wasn't the only mirror of his past. Joanne was also a reflection of something he might still have in his future. The diner's wall clock showed 9 o'clock at night. The crowd had thinned, and a few customers had already left. The winter cold crept further through the cracks of the door, but at that table, 3 people shared an unexpected warmth, the warmth of recognizing themselves in each other's pain. Abigail adjusted her coat, took a deep breath, and spoke again, as if she needed to release words, long kept buried. "The truth is, Daniel, I drank because I couldn't bear the thought of living in a world without her. I drank until I lost everything, until I was thrown out of my home, until no one was left. But seeing you here, seeing this young woman stand up for me, maybe it's a sign that it's not too late." Daniel took her hand again, more firmly this time. "It's not too late, Abigail, not for you, not for me." Joanne moved, smiled even as tears welled in her eyes. "You both deserve a fresh start. We all do." In that moment, in the frozen heart of New York City, 3 once disconnected lives were irreversibly intertwined. Lucy's memory was still a haunting presence, but it was beginning to change, transforming from a wound into a bridge, from absence into connection. And without even realizing it, Daniel, Abigail, and Joanne had taken the first step toward rebuilding not only their individual stories, but a new, shared one. "You need a place to sleep tonight," Daniel said suddenly, his voice cutting through the heavy silence that lingered over the table. Abigail looked up slowly, surprised, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. Her face, marked by age and cold, showed an expression of disbelief, but also a timid flicker of hope. "No, I don't want to be a burden," she replied, trying to smile, though her voice faltered midway through the sentence. "I've gotten used to having nothing, my son." Daniel leaned closer to her, his voice steady and unyielding. "Abigail, you'll never be a burden, least of all to me." He took a deep breath, as if trying to transfer some of his strength to her. "I'm in a position now to give you what you deserve, and I won't let you spend another night out in the cold on the streets of New York." Joanne, the waitress, watching every detail with tear-filled eyes, gently touched Abigail's arm in support. "He's right. You need care, warmth, safety. No one should have to face this winter alone." Abigail shivered slightly, gripping the locket's chain between her fingers. "I've spent many winters alone. I thought that's how it would end, but hearing this from you both..." Her voice cracked, and she had to stop to keep from crying. Daniel squeezed her hand, resolute. "That ends now. You're coming with me. You'll stay at my place tonight." Joanne smiled, though her eyes still showed a trace of concern. "What if someone asks questions?" she said softly. "You know how cruel people can be, judging without knowing the story." Daniel sighed but lifted his chin. "I don't care what anyone says. She's part of my life, part of my story. I won't let her be invisible anymore." Cold wind slipped through the diner's doorframe, a reminder of the urgency. Abigail lowered her eyes, overcome with emotion, and after a few seconds whispered, "If Lucy were here, she'd be smiling." The name of the lost daughter fell on the table like a shadow, but also like a light. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, feeling his throat tighten, and replied, "She's here, Abigail, in every memory, and I know she'd be happy to see that I'm finally taking care of you." Abigail couldn't hold back her tears. Joanne stood up, grabbed a few napkins from the counter, and handed them to the elderly woman, who thanked her with a timid gesture. "Shall we?" Daniel stood, adjusting his overcoat. "My car is outside." Abigail glanced hesitantly toward the snowy street through the window. The idea of leaving that warm diner and facing the cold again made her shiver. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she wouldn't be alone out there. "Let's go," she murmured, using the table for support as she stood. Joanne helped adjust the worn coat over her frail shoulders, and together they walked toward the door. Daniel firmly took Abigail's arm, offering support. As they opened the door, a sharp gust of wind hit them, but unlike all the other times Abigail had faced winter, there was warmth now in the hands that held her. Outside, Daniel's car was covered with a thin layer of snow. He opened the rear door and gently helped Abigail in, then turned to Joanne. "Thank you for everything you did tonight," he said sincerely. "If it weren't for you, none of this might have happened." Joanne smiled, though her eyes were still moist. "I just did what was right, but please take care of her." "I will," he said with conviction. Abigail, already seated in the car, leaned toward the open window to speak to Joanne. "You're an angel, sweetheart. I won't forget what you did for me." Joanne caressed her hand through the window in a silent gesture of affection. "I won't forget you either, Abigail." Daniel gently closed the door, got into the car, and started the engine. The soft hum echoed through the quiet street, where only snowflakes fell, glowing beneath the dim streetlights. As he drove, he glanced in the rearview mirror, watching Abigail resting in the back seat, exhausted but with a peaceful expression. "Are you comfortable?" he asked gently. She smiled faintly, closing her eyes. "More than I've been in years." Her words echoed inside him, a mix of relief and sorrow. Daniel's heart ached to think how many cold, lonely nights she had endured, but along with that weight came the determination to make sure it never happened again. The car moved through the New York streets, cutting through ice and fog, until it parked in front of the luxury building where Daniel lived. The glowing lights reflected off the marble entryway, and a doorman quickly stepped out to assist. "Good evening, Mr. Daniel," he greeted, surprised to see the elderly woman in the back seat. "Good evening," Daniel replied curtly, leaving no room for questions. "Bring a blanket, please." As the attendant obeyed, Daniel helped Abigail out of the car. She looked up at the imposing building, eyes filled with tears, unable to hide her shock. I don't belong in a place like this," she whispered, almost afraid. Daniel crouched slightly to meet her gaze and spoke with firm resolve. "Yes, you do, because from now on, this is your home too." Abigail trembled, not just from the cold, but from emotion. As they entered the warm lobby, her body slowly relaxed. They took the elevator to the top floor, where Daniel's penthouse opened up to a breathtaking view of Manhattan, blanketed in snow. He guided her to the living room, helped her sit on the soft couch, and covered her with the blanket the doorman had brought. "You're safe here, Abigail. You'll have food, warmth, everything you need." She ran her fingers over the soft fabric of the blanket, as if it were something out of a dream. "I don't know how to thank you, Daniel." More tears fell. "After everything, after the mistakes, after all these forgotten years, you still call me family." He sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. "Because you are my family. You always have been." The silence that followed was filled only with the distant sounds of the city. Abigail closed her eyes, letting fatigue finally take over. Daniel stayed by her side, sensing that somehow his life was beginning to find new meaning. There, in that luxurious penthouse, an 89-year-old woman, once invisible on the freezing streets, had found the warmth of a home again. And a man marked by loss had discovered that he could still love, still care, and still rebuild bonds that once seemed lost forever. "Abigail, are you awake?" Daniel asked softly, gently pushing the door open, carrying with him the scent of freshly brewed coffee that filled the hallway. The elderly woman stirred slowly in the armchair near the large glass window of the penthouse. She had fallen asleep there, wrapped in the soft blanket, her face bathed in the pale morning light, reflecting off the snow outside. "I'm awake, my dear," she replied, her voice weak but calm. I had forgotten what it felt like to wake up feeling warm. Daniel walked in, carrying a tray with a steaming cup of coffee and some bread. He set it on the small table beside her and adjusted the blanket over her shoulders. "Today is a new day, Abigail. You won't be cold or hungry here." She looked at the cup as if it were a priceless gift. Her wrinkled hands trembled as she held it, and a shy smile escaped when she tasted the first sip. Hot coffee. It seemed so simple, but for me, it became a dream I no longer thought I'd live again. Daniel sat across from her, observing every movement, every detail of this reunion that seemed to stitch together the lost years. But deep down, his mind throbbed with a growing concern. How to tell her the truth? How to reveal that he knew exactly who she was in his story and that he never should have drifted away? As he pondered, the doorbell rang. He stood up and went to answer it. When he opened the door, he found Joanne, wrapped in a scarf, her cheeks red from the cold. "I brought a few things," she said, holding up a bag filled with winter clothes, extra blankets, and some basic medicine. "I thought they might help." Daniel stepped aside to let her in, and Joanne walked over to Abigail, who smiled upon seeing her. "My dear girl, you again." Abigail reached out, and Joanne took her hand with warmth. "You did so much for me yesterday. You didn't need to worry again today." "I did need to," Joanne replied firmly. "I couldn't stop thinking about you." The living room, warm and filled with soft light, contrasted with the harsh winter howling outside. But despite the comfort, the air felt heavy, as if something unspoken hovered between them. Daniel cleared his throat, trying to release the weight in his chest. "Abigail, I need to talk to you." She looked up, surprised by the seriousness in his tone. "Go on, Daniel." He took a deep breath, gathering the courage, and then began. "When you walked into that diner yesterday, I didn't just see an elderly woman struggling against the cold. I recognized you." He paused, the words pressing heavily on his chest. "You were my nanny when I was a child. You were the one who cared for me in my early years, who taught me to walk, to talk, who stayed with me when my parents weren't around." Abigail's eyes widened, the coffee nearly slipping from her grasp. "What?" she whispered, stunned. Daniel moved closer, kneeling in front of her. "I never forgot you, Abigail. Never. But I didn't know life had led you to the streets. Yesterday, when I saw you being humiliated, when I saw Joanne stand up for you, something inside me broke. Because I realized I couldn't let you remain invisible. Not after what you meant to me." Tears welled in the old woman's eyes as she placed a hand over her chest, as if trying to steady her heart. "Daniel, my little Daniel." Her voice broke, the words barely escaping. "I thought you had forgotten me. I thought life had erased that part of your memory." He shook his head, his eyes misty. "Never. You were the second mother I had, maybe the only one who truly cared back then." Joanne stood quietly nearby, deeply moved by the intensity of their reunion. "I watched you grow up," Abigail murmured, wiping her face with her sleeve. "And then, when I lost Lucy, I didn't have the strength to go on. The drinking consumed me, the cold took over, the loneliness swallowed everything. But you were a memory I kept deep in my heart, something I thought I'd never see again." Daniel held her hands tightly. "But here you are, and I'm going to take care of you, Abigail. I'm going to help restore your dignity, your health, your smile. And I'm not saying this out of pity, it's out of love." Those words shattered whatever resistance Abigail still had. She cried, but not from pain this time, from relief. Joanne, emotional, came closer and placed one of the new pieces of clothing in the elderly woman's lap. "You're not alone anymore, and you never will be again," she said gently. Abigail clutched the locket at her neck, the keepsake holding the old photo she carried as a symbol of all she had lost. "If Lucy could see this," she murmured. Daniel lowered his head, swallowing hard, the name bringing back old wounds. Lucy had been the great love of his youth, the scar that never fully healed. Joanne sensed the loaded silence and unintentionally asked, "Lucy, she was your daughter, wasn't she?" Abigail nodded slowly, eyes glassy. "Yes, my only daughter, my beautiful girl." She turned to Daniel, noticing something shift in his expression. You knew her, didn't you?" His silence was answer enough. "I loved her," Daniel finally admitted, his voice barely more than a whisper. "She was the love of my teenage years, and when she died, I couldn't open my heart to anyone else again." Abigail brought her hands to her face, overwhelmed by memories. Lucy, alive, smiling, walking through the house so young, and now the man in front of her, grown, confessing something she had always suspected. Joanne, emotional and respectful, said nothing. Daniel continued, his eyes damp. "But now, seeing you here, Abigail, I realize that taking care of you is also a way to keep her memory alive." Abigail could no longer hold back her emotions. She embraced him with surprising strength for someone so frail, and the two of them remained like that, bound by the past, by loss, and by a love that had endured through time. Joanne, moved, discreetly wiped away her own tears. The winter sun shone through the glass, lighting up the unexpected reunion. For the first time in years, Abigail felt truly seen. Daniel, in turn, realized his heart still had room to rebuild bonds. And Joanne understood that she was witnessing the beginning of a new chapter in all their lives. There, in the warmth of that room, three once disconnected lives came together, and the emptiness left by loss slowly began to give way to something else. Hope. "Are you okay, Abigail?" Joanne asked, closing the living room window after noticing a cold draft sweeping through the space. The elderly woman looked up slowly, still wrapped in the blanket. Her tired face showed signs of many difficult nights, but there was also a new serenity in her expression. "I'm okay. At least better than I've been in years." She clutched the cup of tea in her hands. "It's still strange waking up in a warm place, without the fear that someone might throw me out or steal my things." Daniel entered soon after, holding a leather folder. He placed it on the coffee table and took a deep breath. "We need to talk, all of us. There are decisions that can't wait any longer." Joanne moved closer, slightly apprehensive. Abigail, suspicious, narrowed her eyes. "What kind of decisions, Daniel?" Her voice wavered between fear and hope. He opened the folder and pulled out some papers. "I'm organizing the process to make sure you have legal identification again, access to health care, and a dignified place to live. Also, I'm setting up a fund so you'll never have to worry about anything again." Abigail's eyes widened, both surprised and frightened. "No, Daniel, I don't want to be a burden. I've already caused you enough trouble." He stepped closer, placing his hands gently over hers. "Abigail, you'll never be a burden, not after everything you did for me when I was a child. Now it's my turn." Her voice caught in her throat, and quiet tears formed in her eyes, though a silent resistance lingered. Joanne noticed and leaned in to speak softly. "You're not alone, Abigail. Daniel's not trying to buy your gratitude. He just wants to give back a little of what he received." Abigail looked away, staring out the fogged window. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering everything in white. "I don't know if I deserve this much." Her voice was low, like a confession. "I fell into drinking, lost Lucy, let life crush me. I wasn't strong enough." Daniel sat beside her, his voice firm and filled with emotion. "Abigail, you were there for me when I needed it most. You didn't fail. You were the one steady presence in my childhood, and now I want to be that presence for you." Silence fell until Joanne, on impulse, reached out and took Abigail's hand. "You do deserve this. Everyone deserves a second chance, especially someone who once gave so much love." Abigail looked at the young woman, her eyes glassy, and for the first time, she truly smiled. "You two are too stubborn for me to argue with," she murmured with a hint of playful resignation. "Maybe I should just say yes." Daniel let out a quiet laugh, relieved. "You should, because I've already started working on everything." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Joanne stood to answer it, and on the other side was a man in a dark suit, carrying a folder much like Daniel's. "Mr. Carter?" the visitor asked. "Yes, that's me." Daniel stood surprised. "Come in, please." The man greeted everyone and handed over some documents. "These are the initial reports for Abigail's legal restoration process. We've gathered the necessary information, and everything should be finalized soon." Abigail's eyes widened again, still unable to believe what she was hearing. "It's real, then. I'm going to have a name again, a home." Daniel smiled, gently touching her shoulder. "Yes, and much more." After the man left, the room fell quiet again, filled only with the sound of snow tapping against the windows. Joanne watched Daniel in silence. She admired his determination, but also sensed the weight he carried, especially whenever Lucy's name came up. Later, after Abigail had fallen asleep, Joanne and Daniel moved to the kitchen. He was making coffee while she observed him. "Are you okay?" Joanne asked. Daniel took a deep breath, watching the steam rise from the cup. "It's harder than I thought. Seeing Abigail again, it brings back memories of Lucy constantly." Joanne stepped closer, resting a hand on his arm. "But it's also a chance to heal, Daniel. You don't have to carry this pain alone." He looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Since the moment you stood up for Abigail in that diner, everything changed. I don't know if I could have done all this without you." They fell silent for a moment, just looking at each other. Something unspoken lingered, something deeper than compassion. Joanne looked away, blushing slightly. "I only did what felt right. And that's what showed me I wasn't alone," Daniel replied, gently touching her hand. The touch was brief, but it sent a quiet warmth through both of them. Before they could say anything more, a sound from the living room reminded them of Abigail. They rushed back and found her shifting in the armchair, quietly whimpering. "Abigail!" Daniel called, worried. She opened her eyes slowly, a little disoriented. "I'm okay. I just dreamed of Lucy." Tears slid silently down her cheeks. She was smiling at me. Daniel knelt beside her, taking her hand. "Maybe that's a sign she's at peace, Abigail." She nodded, pressing the locket to her chest. "I just want to believe I still have time to be remembered for something good, not just the pain I left behind." Joanne stepped closer and added, "You're already remembered for the good, Abigail, and you will be even more." Daniel looked at the two women who now filled his present, and despite the sorrow, he could feel a new path forming before them. Outside, winter still howled relentless, but inside that penthouse, there was warmth, there was hope. 3 lives, once broken, now intertwined, stitching together a new story, one of reunion, revelation, and most of all, the chance to begin again. The door slammed hard against the wall, making Joanne jump. It was Daniel. His face was tense, his breathing heavy, as if he'd just come back from an invisible battle. He shrugged off his overcoat, tossing it onto the back of a chair, and ran a hand through his hair, wet from melting snow. "What happened?" Joanne asked, standing up immediately. Daniel took a few seconds to answer. His eyes shifted between the floor and the window, as if searching for strength to speak what was tearing him apart inside. "I got a call from one of my attorneys," he finally said, his voice low and strained. "There's a problem with Abigail's case." Joanne's brow furrowed with concern. "A problem? What kind?" "People trying to interfere," Daniel replied, punching the table with barely restrained anger. "Looks like someone doesn't want her to be officially recognized. Maybe something tied to her past with the shelter. They're trying to contest the documents." The noise stirred Abigail, who had been resting in the armchair. She sat up slowly, adjusting the blanket over her shoulders. "Does that mean I'll have to go back to the streets?" Her voice trembled, heavy with fear. Daniel walked to her, knelt in front of the chair and held her frail hands. "No, never again. I promise you'll never go through that again." Abigail took a deep breath, her chest rising as if the promise was both a comfort and a burden. "But if they won't accept, I'll fight this to the end," Daniel cut in, resolute, "no matter who's behind it." Joanne stepped closer, gently touching his shoulder. "You don't have to face this alone. I'll help too." He looked at her, and for a moment, the tension melted into gratitude, but it returned just as quickly, deeper than before. "I know I can count on you, Joanne, but there are things I need to handle in my own way. There are ghosts from my past tied to this." Abigail watched them, trying to decipher what was being left unsaid. "Ghosts," she murmured. Daniel looked away as if the topic opened a wound still bleeding. "It's better if we don't talk about that right now. What matters is that you stay calm." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the wind beating against the windows. Joanne tried to ease the mood by serving tea, but the tension lingered like a shadow in the room. Later, once Abigail had fallen back asleep, Daniel and Joanne remained in the kitchen, their cups long forgotten on the table. "Daniel, you have to trust me," Joanne finally said. "If there's something in your past that's threatening Abigail, I need to know." He sighed, rubbing his face with both hands. "When I was a teenager, after Lucy died, I lost my way. Got involved with the wrong people, dark business deals. I managed to get out, but not without making enemies. And now it looks like one of them has found a way to hurt me, through Abigail." Joanne raised a hand to her mouth, shocked. "My God, what are we going to do?" "We face it," Daniel replied without hesitation, "but I need you to be ready." She nodded, firm, even though fear pulsed in her chest. The next morning, Daniel found an envelope slipped under the door. He opened it to find a handwritten message. "Don't dig up what's buried. Abigail must not be recognized." He crushed the note in his fist, furious, but didn't say anything to Abigail, not yet. He stuffed the paper in his pocket and decided to act quietly. Shortly after, Joanne noticed something different in his expression. "What is it now?" she asked. Daniel hesitated, then finally showed her the note. "This is a clear threat. They know where we are." Joanne felt her stomach twist. "And Abigail? What are we going to tell her?" "Nothing," Daniel said flatly. "She suffered enough. I'm not letting her carry this too." But Abigail, who had been standing quietly in the hallway and overheard part of the conversation, stepped forward with slow steps. "You don't have to protect me like I'm a child. I want to know the truth." Joanne tried to intervene, but Daniel let out a deep sigh, defeated. "I got a threat. They're trying to block your case." Abigail closed her eyes, her body trembling. "I always felt like I was meant to live on the margins." "No!" Daniel snapped, his voice rising. "Don't say that. I won't allow it." The force in his voice startled her at first, but then it lit something in her again, a spark of hope. "If you believe in this that much," Abigail murmured, "then I'll believe too." Joanne took her hands, adding softly, "We'll face this together." That silent pact strengthened the bond between the three of them, but at the same time, Daniel knew the fight had only begun. There were enemies in the shadows, painful memories to confront, and a web of secrets that needed to be unraveled. That night, alone in the living room, he opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo of Lucy. Her eyes looked back at him, gentle, as if still watching over him. "I promise, Lucy," he whispered. "I won't fail your mother, or Joanne." Outside, the snow kept falling, cloaking the streets in silence. But inside the penthouse, the storm was something else entirely, one of truth coming to light, of threats drawing near, and of a quiet love beginning to glow in the darkness. And in that moment, Daniel understood that to protect Abigail and to move forward with Joanne, he would have to finally face the ghosts of his past, even if it cost more than he was ready to give.
What it meant to you. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. This is really important for the channel. Really important. And if you're ready for another story of love and hope, click the first card or the second one to watch the full playlist. See you there.